What's up guys, my name's Brandon and today we're going to be unboxing and reviewing the brand new iPod Touch 7th generation. So it's funny, just last week I picked up an iPod Touch 6th generation and made a video here on the channel talking about whether or not you should buy one, and if you want to check that out, it's up in the cards right now. So it's pretty funny that Apple just a week later decides to release the 7th generation iPod Touch. And so of course in this video we're going to be comparing these two, we're going to be doing speed tests and things like that. I'm also going to let you know whether or not it's worth updating to the iPod Touch 7th generation, and if you don't have an iPod Touch, if it's actually worth buying in the first place. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the unboxing and then we're gonna talk a lot more about this iPod Touch. So you can see here, I have the blue model right here and the 32 gigabyte capacity. So even though we do have a new model of the iPod Touch, it comes in the same colors as the previous generation. So we have red, blue, pink, silver, space gray, and gold. You also have the storage options of 32, 128, and 256 gigabytes, and prices start at $199 and go up $100 per storage option. So that's a whopping $399 for the 256 gigabyte model. Yikes. All right, so anyways, let's go ahead and set this guy off to the side a little bit and let's go ahead and unbox the new iPod Touch 7th generation. So we have this little peel tab on the top and then we do have this plastic enclosure. This is still very nostalgic. This is still very old school. This unboxing experience just takes me back so many years, like a decade really, to like the iPod Touch 4th generation, 2nd generation. So we still have the same old plastic packaging, unlike the iPhones. So let's just go ahead and get this guy on out of here. So let's see what we have inside. So we just have a little pamphlet here that talks about everything on the iPod Touch. We have our lightning cable and we also have our ear pods, not our AirPods, because we do have a headphone jack on the iPod Touch. So we don't really care about any of that. Let's go ahead and set it off to the side. Let's take it out of this little hard plastic enclosure here. So we're just gonna go ahead and take this off of the front. So I'm pretty sure this is the only Apple product that still uses a fake home screen on the front to cover up the screen. So anyways, here is the iPod Touch 7th generation. Let's go ahead and boot it on up. And this thing is just as light. It's pretty much the exact same as the 6th generation. Feels the exact same in the hand. Everything on the outside is going to be exactly the same as the previous generation. It's a very lightweight device. It's also very thin. If you look at the side profile there, we have the same buttons on the left-hand side. We have the volume rockers, no buttons at all on the right-hand side of the phones. On the bottom, we do have the lightning port. We have the headphone jack on the bottom left, and then we have these speakers on the bottom right. And then on the back, these guys are pretty much exactly the same. You can see there's a little bit less on the back of the new 7th generation iPod Touch. There's less verbiage on there, like less writing. So yeah, like I said, it is very lightweight and very thin, but at the same time, it doesn't really feel super premium. And that's one of the big downsides to the iPod Touch, is that it doesn't have a lot of weight. So it kind of just doesn't feel premium when you're holding it in your hand. That's not going to matter to some people, but to me, I like a little bit of weight added to my devices. It just feels more secure in the hand, just feels more premium and nice. All right, so now we are all set up on the new iPod Touch 7th generation. So let's go ahead and talk about the performance, the battery life, the display, all that fun stuff. So on the front side, of course, we do have the exact same 4-inch LCD display with a resolution of 640 by 1136 at 326 pixels per inch. And like I've already mentioned in the past, this display is just not that great. Like, yeah, you can watch videos and play games, but nothing will be super high quality. You can watch YouTube videos in up to 1080p, and the display itself isn't bad, but what makes it, not as enjoyable is just how small the screen is and how ugly the bezels, the white bezels at that, are around the screen. And this will be especially true if you normally watch videos on really any device newer than like the iPhone 7, especially if you have like an iPhone 10 or newer, you're gonna have these bezels. You're not gonna be able to unsee these bezels because you're used to having a bezel-less, or at least a near bezel-less phone. So it's gonna be an issue if you have used any of the modern iPhones, but if you've, coming from like an iPhone 5 or 4S or 5C, then it's not gonna be a huge deal to you. While watching videos or playing games, you'll also notice that these speakers on the bottom aren't all that bad. Now they aren't great and they don't compare to any of the iPhones because it's only one set of speakers down there. So it doesn't really give you that full sound, if you know what I mean. But for what it is, for just one little set of 5 speakers down there, it's actually not that bad. They actually get pretty loud. Now, if you're looking to buy an iPod Touch to strap to your arm for jogging, if you just want to take it to the gym, or if you buy it for like a kid who maybe isn't old enough for an iPhone yet, then of course the display or the external speakers aren't going to be a big deal to you at all. Also on the front side of the iPod Touch 7th generation is that measly little 1.2 megapixel camera, and this thing is just terrible. I mean, it lacks in pretty much everything. I mean, yes, you can FaceTime. You can see the FaceTime icon right there. Of course, you could take pictures and things like that, but the quality is just going to look like a potato. It's really not good at all. But once again, most people probably aren't looking to buy this product for the cameras anyways, especially not the front-facing camera. Now, on the rear side, of course, we do have a better camera at 8 megapixels, but again, the quality just isn't that great. I mean, you can shoot video and up to 1080p at 30 frames per second, but there's no OIS, so videos are going to be shaky and just not great quality overall. I mean, the audio is also especially not good when taking videos. So I'm just going to go ahead and say that if you're looking to buy an iPod Touch, at least make sure you have another phone with a good camera on it, preferably an iPhone, so you could take pictures with that instead of taking pictures with the iPod Touch. All right, so now let's talk about performance on the iPod Touch 7th generation, and we're also going to do a little mini speed test here compared to the iPod Touch 6th generation. So before we get into that, let's talk about the specs on the iPod Touch 7th generation. So we do now have Apple's A10 Fusion chip, and that is a step up from the 6th generation's A8 chip, and we have 1 GB of RAM, which remains the same from the previous generation, unfortunately. So let's go ahead and open up some applications and see just how much faster this new A10 Fusion chip is compared to the A8 chip in the previous generation. So we're going to start it off with a bang by opening up PUBG at the same time in 3, 2, 1. Press at the exact same time here on both. Let's see which one loads up first and just how much quicker this new iPod Touch is. So you can already see it's getting off to a big lead over the previous generation here. So we're almost up to the full start screen now, and we're still on the very first loading screen on the 6th generation iPod Touch. And yep, we pretty much got there. You know, it's going to be at least a 10-15 second difference here between the two. And then it finally loaded up there on the iPod Touch 6th generation. That was at least like a 20 to 25 second difference there. And with this new A10 Fusion chip, we do also have better graphics, and I can already tell just by looking at the textures in the background that the graphics are definitely better here on the new iPod Touch. So now let's move on to Asphalt 9 in 3, 2, 1. Once again, the iPod Touch 7th generation off to a quick start here over the previous generation, and we're already to the front screen here. So we can go and click on play, and we're still waiting on the 6th generation iPod Touch. Still waiting, and there we go. Now let's go ahead and do something like Twitter in 3, 2, 1. Let's see how much faster something like a social media application opens up on the new A10 Fusion chip, or the new iPod Touch with the A10 Fusion chip. And you can see there, again, a big difference, especially going from one generation to the next. That is a massive difference there. Let's go to YouTube. And once again, this one should load up pretty quickly, but you can see there, big difference in the 6th generation and the 7th generation there. And then finally, let's go ahead and do Amazon. And this should be the same story. Yes, once again, 7th generation by a good margin, still loading up finally there on the 6th generation. So clearly the iPod Touch is much faster than the 6th generation. Now Apple claims it's 2 times faster, but I would argue that it's maybe even faster than that, maybe 3 times in some scenarios like with PUBG. Now one thing I do also want to mention is that Fortnite does now run on the 7th generation iPod Touch, whereas in the 6th generation, you'll notice how you can't even launch the game because it's so outdated with that A8 chip. So you can see here we're connecting on the 7th generation and we're downloading an update, but on the 6th generation, you'll see here very shortly that it's not supported and that we will have to close the application. As you can see right there, we click OK, and it kicks us back to the home screen. So yes, the iPod Touch 7th generation is faster than the previous generation, but still, it's pretty expensive for all that it's lacking in terms of, you know, camera, display, everything. RAM, only 1 GB of RAM, especially when you compare it to something like the iPhone 7 or the iPhone 7 Plus. That's going to beat the iPod Touch 7th generation, the new one here, in pretty much every category. And you can pick up a mint condition iPhone 7 Plus on eBay for just around $200 to $250. So when it comes to gaming, the iPod Touch 7th generation is a nice improvement over the 6th generation, the previous generation iPod Touch. Especially in PUBG, I noticed that it's a lot less laggy, it's not as choppy, and the graphics are definitely better, but it's still not perfect. And I would definitely rather have an iPhone 7 or an iPhone 7 Plus with that extra gigabyte of RAM and also the other features it brings in the bigger display over the iPod Touch 7th generation. And speaking of that 1 GB of RAM, that does mean you are going to have to reload applications a lot more often than you would on more modern devices with more than 1 GB of RAM. So for instance, we were just in Asphalt, and you can see we do have to relaunch it here. I guess on both we did have to relaunch it, not a full relaunch on the 7, but on the 6th generation, for some reason, we did have to do a full relaunch of the application there. But what I'm saying is you will, throughout, using this on a day-to-day basis, you will notice how applications don't stay open as long in the background as they do on other devices with more than 1 GB of RAM, which can be an issue for some people. Now, of course, we are running iOS 12.3 on both devices, and this iPod Touch right here, the new 7th generation, will be supported with iOS 13. Not sure how much longer it's going to last due to it just having 1 GB of RAM, but of course, time will tell. Now, the 6th generation iPod Touch is most likely not going to be supported by iOS 13. And now finally, let's discuss the battery life for the iPod Touch 7th generation, and really for both, because Apple decided to keep, for some reason, the exact same battery in the iPod Touch 7th generation as they had in the 6th generation from 4 years ago. So we have a 1043 milliamp hour battery, and that is a tiny battery. So obviously with a tiny battery comes tiny usage times, especially if you don't charge it very often. You're going to notice that you don't really get a lot out of your battery. So Apple rates the battery good for 40 hours of music playback and 8 hours of video playback. And if it's anything like the 6th generation iPod Touch, which it's the same battery, so I would assume it's pretty much the same. We may get better optimization here because of the new chip, and that's more optimized for modern, iOS, like iOS 12. So we may get like half an hour better, maybe an hour better on the new iPod Touch. But I struggled to even get 3.5 hours of usage on the iPod Touch 6th generation. So for the new iPod Touch 7th generation, I would imagine we'd maybe get 4 hours of usage on a single charge. I will report back on the battery life after about a week. I'll put it in the description. Now on the positive side, the iPod Touch does charge up super quick. I mean, it's a small battery, so it doesn't take long at all for it to charge up to 100%. All right, so now let's discuss whether or not this iPod Touch 7th generation is worth the money. So the first thing I'll say is that you should only consider the 32 GB model. I wouldn't even think about buying the 128 or the 256 GB model of the iPod Touch. And it's not only because of the price, which is ridiculous for the 128 and the 256, but also because what are you really going to need the storage for on an iPod Touch? Can't imagine you're going to be taking many pictures or videos, and even if you are, it doesn't shoot in 4K, so they're not going to take up a lot of space. And still, you won't even need storage for music, if you use Apple Music or Spotify. So what are you really going to use all that storage on? I mean, applications? I just think that most people won't need a lot of storage. And plus, spending anything more than $200 for an iPod Touch in 2019 is a waste of money, in my opinion, or just a bad way to spend your money. Now, the reason I say it's a bad decision is because you can pick up a used, mint condition iPhone 7 or a 7 Plus, which has a much better display and a bigger display, has a way better camera on the front and the back, has better performance, and can make calls for around the same price or even less than this new $200 iPod Touch. So with that being said, the only consumers I can recommend the iPod Touch to are those who are going to use it solely for music, and preferably those who still use wired headphones, because of course this and the iPhone SE are now the two fastest Apple products that still have headphone jacks. So if you jog a lot and you want this to strap to your arm, or if you just need a music player while you're walking or working out or riding your bike, whatever the case may be, I could see this being worth it. But if you're looking to buy this for your kid, I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that they're not really going to like it, especially these days where probably all their friends have like iPhone 10s and iPad Pros. Every kid is spoiled these days. They're not going to really enjoy a measly little iPod Touch. So anyways, guys, there you have it. That is my review on the new iPod Touch 7th generation. Let me know what you think about it down in the comment section below. If you guys did enjoy this review, I would appreciate a thumbs up, and also make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of my iOS 13 coverage. Of course, I'll be covering all the Apple products this year as well. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you soon.